Okay, world, it's 10 a.m. Thank you for joining us. Um, my name is Jen Cameron. I am a member of the Hopkins LAC, the Legislative Action Coalition. Um, Steve Adams and I, and one of our student board reps, Manuel, will be your hosts this morning. And we would like to welcome our candidates for District 43B. Mike Freiburg has joined us here on the call, and Steve Merriman sent us a message just in the last few minutes that he would not be joining us. And so we will have Representative Mike Freiburg, and we'll have you answer some questions. But first, I would like to invite you to just take 2 minutes and introduce yourself and your campaign.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So thank you to the Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition for scheduling this event. For those who don't know me, I grew up in Golden Valley. I attended schools in the Hopkins School District through 7th grade. I currently have 2 kids attending schools in the Robbinsdale School District. I work as a public health attorney and have been a state representative for 12 years. The recent legislative session was historic. After many years of divided government that prevented meaningful progress for our state, we passed universal free school meals, we legalized cannabis, we adopted gun violence prevention measures, we codified reproductive freedom and banned forever chemicals. As your state representative, I played a key role in delivering this legislation. I authored 36 bills that became law, at least in part. These bills ranged in topics from service learning to funding a fire station in our district, to healthcare policy, to sewer infrastructure, to land surveying, to consumer fraud, to the state flag. I chaired the elections committee, helping pass legislation such as automatic voter registration, pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds, restore the vote, the Minnesota Voting Rights Act, and the National Popular Vote Compact. But more needs to be done to build a state that works for everyone. We need to continue investing in our public schools, fund transit that will benefit the suburbs, and continue protecting our environment. I'm sure during this event, we'll discuss issues of importance to residents of Crystal, Golden Valley, Plymouth, and Robbinsdale, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, sir. I am going to walk through some housekeeping. You can see here on our first slide this photo of our some of our student board reps with our Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. I'll give you a quick skinny on what the Hopkins Public Schools Legislative Action Coalition does. We are a nonpartisan advocacy group comprised of school board members, parents, students, and other community members. We advocate for education funding and policies at both the state and federal levels, working closely with district leadership to identify pressing education issues each year. So we create a legislative platform that is approved by our school board to represent the district's priorities. And we're recognized by our legislators as being a valuable resource. We partner with the AMSD, MSBA, and neighboring school district advocacy groups. We host community events on education finance, special education, and school safety. And we organize a day of advocacy at the Capitol, including individual meetings with our 9 legislators. What you'll see now is a map of Hopkins schools. We have a wide district with our district really spanning all the way from Golden Valley up in your neck of the woods, Representative Freiburg, all the way to Eden Prairie and in between. So 7 cities are represented here in our Hopkins School District, which gives us a wide, diverse constituency. Here's the schedule for the day. We had Ann Johnson-Stewart join us at the 9 a.m. hour. Kathleen Folk also was unable to join us. And will be followed with a 11, 1, 2, and 3. So we invite everyone to join us and learn more about your candidates. here's some guidelines to stick to. We'll tell you a little bit about how we're going to host, and then we'll also tell you a little bit about the rules. The LAC does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates and not of the LAC or of Hopkins Public Schools. The purpose of this forum is to offer an opportunity for voters to hear the candidates discuss important education issues that will affect students and families in our school district and across Minnesota. And Public Schools Legislative Action Coalition is a nonpartisan advocacy group. The community had the opportunity to submit questions in advance. We gave a QR code publicly as well as via email. Questions that are unclear, hostile, or of a personal nature will not be used. Questions that are similar may be combined and summarized by the moderators. And questions are can be submitted by a chat on the YouTube live stream right now. And the YouTube live stream is being sent directly to Facebook Live. So you can really put questions in Facebook or in YouTube. The moderator will treat them as stated above, though only questions related to education will be entertained for the purposes of this forum. Again, with some moderation, each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves and 1 minute for a concluding statement. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question presented. The timekeeper will present a running timer, which for the purposes of this particular forum, I don't know that we will need, but the LAC would like to remind candidates that this is not a debate. Don't debate yourself. Please do not address one another, and we reserve the right to utilize the mute feature if the candidate exceeds the time or doesn't abide by this format. We'll start with question 1. In recent years, numerous proposals have been made in the legislature to provide public funding for private and religious schools, either directly through vouchers or indirectly through tax credits, tax sheltered accounts, or by routing tuition through tax-exempt organizations. What is your position on providing public funding for non-public schools? And please explain your reasoning.
Sure, thank you for the question. I oppose vouchers and I oppose diverting money from our public school system. Public funds should be used for public schools, and vouchers also run the risk that public funds will be used to advance a religious message, which would be in violation of the First Amendment to the US Constitution. And just generally speaking, I feel like there's been an overemphasis on so-called school choice that's undermined our public school system by diverting resources away from neighborhood schools. I think the legislature should refocus on its mission under the state constitution of establishing a general and uniform system of public schools. And I feel like vouchers kind of go against that principle. So I would oppose efforts to create a voucher system.
Thank you. Steve, do you want to ask question number 2?
Sure. Regarding school funding, if elected, your oath to uphold the Minnesota State Constitution includes the education clause, which reads in part, the legislature shall make such provisions by taxation or otherwise as will secure a thorough and efficient system of public education throughout the state. And as you are aware, the increases in the state funding formula are not keeping up with inflation and expenses. The consumer price index increased over the last 2 years anywhere between 2.5% to 9.1%. The increase in the formula in 2023 still resulted in a deficit in some districts, even with reductions to curb expenses, due in part to many new mandates that came with the funding increase. Do you support an increase in the per pupil formula and removal of the current cap of 3% on the inflation factor for the per pupil formula? And do you have any additional solutions to secure sound funding for Minnesota public schools?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We made huge steps in funding our schools in the recent legislative session. Schools will get an automatic 2% increase in the general education formula every year. And that's not every biennium, but every year. Certainly, though, more needs to be done to make districts whole after more than a decade of underinvestment into our public school system as a result of divided government. So I support increasing the formula. I'm not sure about changing the cap on the inflation factor. My understanding is inflation rarely goes over 3%. And changing it could have big effects on the state budget, which we're constitutionally required to keep balanced. But certainly, anything can be up for discussion. I think after consulting with the various stakeholders, it's something I'd be willing to look into. And I think just generally speaking, we need to make sure that there's a reliable, dedicated source of funding for our public schools. As I said, we made a great deal of progress in the past session in that regard, but just given the underinvestment in our schools over the last 10 plus years, I think it's, we still have a ways to go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question number 3 is, how does your vision for public education in Minnesota align with the priorities of the Minnesota Department of Education?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I looked, so the way the question was submitted, it talked specifically about the Due North, Minnesota's education plan. I wasn't super familiar with that, just to be honest. It looks like it was kind of created to help us come out of the pandemic, and it's a couple years old at this point. I mean, certainly it seems to include provisions I support in general. I mean, and just looking through it, it looks like it includes a lot of provisions that we've already passed. So we expanded full service community schools. We provided dedicated funds to hire school counselors, psychologists, and nurses. We invested in teachers of color and expanded access to ethnic studies. It seems to include a lot of important provisions that are things that I generally support. So I'm certainly willing to keep working on the provisions that we haven't done, and look forward to continuing to invest in our schools in the upcoming session.
Thank you. We have a couple of additional questions from community members that our student board rep Manuel is going to ask. I will tee him up here. Are you there, Manuel?
Hello, yes. So I have a few questions from our community. Many Hopkins public schools are unsafe for children to walk or bike to. We know that walking to school has tremendous mental and physical health benefits for students. What will you do to expand the safe routes to school available for students?
Yeah, I'm a strong supporter of the State Routes for School program. I understand, I think certainly it's a federal state partnership that we need to keep working on. I think we should work with the cities and counties in our districts just to ensure that there's adequate bike trail. A lot of pedestrian facilities aren't things that are passed at the school level. So I think it's going to require partnership with cities and counties. Certainly there are things I think we can do to help schools with it, whether it's providing funding for bike racks or things like that. But generally speaking, I'm a strong supporter of this. I think cities generally need to be more walkable. And I think that's absolutely true when you're talking about students having the ability to get to their schools, and that should be true any season of the year, I would say too. So I think cities need to make sure that sidewalks and bike trails are plowed so that people can get places in the winter and students can get to school. So yeah, strong supporter of it. I think that's a great question. Thank you for asking.
Of course. Minnesota is one of 8 states that provides free school meals for students. In all of these states, the program is more popular than expected and more families are participating. When we add inflationary costs for food and delivery, all 8 states are over budget. How can Minnesota increase and stabilize future funding to feed students?
Yeah, we did include an inflationary adjustment to the general education formula, and certainly I think inflation is something we need to take into account, in every aspect of school financing, because we want to make sure our schools remain whole. I think finding dedicated fund, I think the continued increases in the general education formula will help. I think we may need to look at something like that with the school meals program as well, quite frankly, because I'm a strong supporter of the school meals program. I think it's one of the top accomplishments of this past session, and we need to make sure that it continues to be a robust program and that there's the resources necessary for schools to continue funding meals for students. So yeah, that's something I certainly support continuing to look at to make sure we can continue to provide it to our students.
Would you be willing to vote against your caucus's position if it is in the best interest of your local school district?
Yeah, I mean, we're there to represent our districts and our constituents. So if there were something that I felt, was not representative of the district, I would certainly, prioritize my constituents. I mean, it's not, generally speaking, my beliefs match up pretty well with the caucus. And I think it's fair to say the constituents that I represent line up pretty well with what we as a caucus have passed in the Minnesota legislature. But certainly there are occasions where you have to vote with your constituents, and I've done that and will continue to do that where it's necessary.
In what ways can the legislature help school districts increase and diversify their teaching workforce?
Yeah, I think we made some investments recruiting teachers of color in the past year. So that teachers can resemble the students that they teach. I think it's students are more effective when they have teachers that they can identify with. So I think continuing to invest in teachers of color, whether it's through recruitment of teachers in non-traditional places or supporting programs like loan forgiveness for people to get their degrees. I'm willing to look at everything just to continue. I mean, we just need to invest in our teacher workforce generally, but I think in getting a diverse group of teachers is also a critically important component of that, and I support doing so.
In 2023, the Minnesota legislature allocated money to address the cross-subsidy for mandated special education and English learner services. This funding brought school districts halfway there in terms of full funding. What are your plans for filling the remaining and growing funding gap for these services?
Yeah, I mean, this is a promise that the federal government has made to the states, a requirement that this federal government has placed on us without providing funding. So, I mean, my hope would be we can leverage federal funding for it, but I think we've waited for them for too long. We've seen how dysfunctional the U.S. Congress is, so I think we made a huge step forward by reducing the special education cross subsidy by 44% in fiscal year 24 to 26, by 50% fiscal year 26 and later, as well as the funding for English learners. So, assuming there's continued inaction on the part of Congress, I think that's something we need to look at further. We might need to look at some sort of dedicated revenue source for it because, like I said, we are required to balance the state budget, but I think it is critically important that every student has the opportunity to access education, whether they have a disability or whether they're an English learner. So it's something I'm certainly supportive of continuing to look at and investing at the state level if we have to do so.
As of May 2023, education support professionals, including nutrition staff, paraprofessionals, bus drivers, and other non-licensed hourly paid workers, are eligible to receive unemployment benefits from the state when school is out of session. In Hopkins, we fully support the financial cushion this provides our essential staff during the summer months, but we are concerned about how our district will fund this unemployment insurance after June 2027 when the one-time funding ends. What are your plans to continue funding for this benefit for school staff?
Yeah, I mean, that would be a big expense for school districts. So, sometimes at the legislature, I know we have to make decisions about whether to fund things on a one-time basis or an ongoing basis. I think this is a hugely important one. It's critically important for hourly school workers, enabling them to access unemployment insurance. So I'm hopeful that we can continue to provide it. I mean, I think we'll wait to see what the budget forecast is when we go back into session, that we'll see the February forecast. It's looking positive, like there's going to be a surplus. So I'm hopeful we can use that surplus to invest in some of these critically important ongoing expenses for school districts, and I would support looking into that.
Greater numbers of students are seeking to take advantage of off-campus learning opportunities like PSEO, internships, and apprenticeships. Unfortunately, transportation to these opportunities remains a barrier for equitable access. Do you have ideas on how districts can level the playing field?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we can look at expanded transportation funding at the legislative level, but I think just generally we need to have a stronger system of public transportation in Minnesota. And it's particularly true, I would say, in the inner ring suburbs. You know, if you're in the Minneapolis or St. Paul, there's fairly reliable bus service. If you're in, if slightly farther out suburbs, there's the suburban opt-out programs where you can take a bus into the, a nice pushy bus into the core city. But as you get into kind of the inner ring suburbs, I think a lot of times just in terms of bus routes, it isn't there. So, we need to have mass transit. I support the Blue Line extension proposal that would go through Robbinsdale. And I know the Green Line is continuing, and that's probably going to go through the Hopkins School District. That should be online soon. So just we need to have not only those, but adequate bus service, I think, throughout the metro area. So I think if we do that, then that will help enable students to access some of these programs like PSEO. So certainly I think the school district has a role to play, but I think the Met Council and Metro Transit certainly has a role to play as well.
All right, the last question I have is schools have changed how they deliver education, but not how they assess students. What are your thoughts on changing how to measure student success?
Yeah, I do think there has been something of an over-reliance on testing for funding for schools. So, I would want to work with all of the stakeholders, teachers, student groups, just to find better ways to measure it that are not punitive towards school districts, but that do have some accountability measures in there, and find ways just to make sure students are meeting their potential in every school district. So that's certainly something I support looking at.
Thank you. That's all we have.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mike. We really appreciate your time today and your interest on education issues, the LIC, along with your constituents. Enjoy learning more about your priorities for education funding and policies that affect the future of Minnesota students. We appreciate your candidacy, and we wish you the best of luck in the November elections.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Mike.
Absolutely. If you want to give us a minute of wrap up or parting comments, you're more than welcome.
Sure. Well, yeah, thank you once again to the Hopkins School District Legislative Action Coalition for putting on this forum. I've been knocking on doors and talking to voters since the legislative session ended. If anyone watching has any questions, I hope we can chat in the coming weeks before the election so I can find out what issues are important to you. I'm committed to making sure our public schools have the resources they need to thrive, and that our public schools have the resources they need to be successful. Our public school students, rather, have the resources they need to be successful members of society. If you'd like to learn more about me, you can visit my website, www.mikefreiburg.com. Thanks again for your time. Thanks for this debate, and thank you for your consideration in the upcoming election.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank
Mike.
you.